It's rare that any athlete goes throughout their entire career without questioning their ability. Almost all sports people will at times feel like a fraud, that they're not actually that good, and it's only a matter of time until they get found out. This is the essence of imposter syndrome, which is an internal experience of believing that you are not as competent as others perceive you to be. And although it's perfectly normal, it can obviously be detrimental if you feel it when stepping onto the pitch, court, or track. So today's video will explain 3 ways in which you can deal with imposter syndrome and maximize your chances of peak performance. When it comes to imposter syndrome, it comes down to the fact that you feel like you're missing something that's preventing you from being able to perform at the level required, whether that's particular skills, abilities, or your physical or mental attributes. So to overcome those feelings, you need to provide your brain with evidence that you've got more than enough ability, skill, or whatever it is in order to put in the desired performance. And a big source of that evidence is reflecting on all the training and practice that you've actually put in. If you're a runner feeling like an imposter in the build up to your first marathon, then take 10 minutes to open up your Strava or whatever app you use and look at the data. See that you've put in the 20, 30, 40 and 50 mile weeks. See that you've done the ideal blend of easy and tempo runs. The data doesn't lie, and that is powerful enough to shut down that inner gremlin telling you you're not ready or capable. A lot of sports require athletes to keep training logs, so make sure you look at those, or look at your stats from games that have been recorded by your team, your coaches, or the league. And if you don't have access to training logs or stats, just take a moment to reflect on all the practice sessions that you've put in recently. Think about those sessions that have gone well, where your skills or fitness have developed, and also think back to previously successful performances on the field, the court, or the track. You will have gotten to where you are now because you've put in the work, but unfortunately it's human nature to just always focus on the next thing. And because of that, you don't become aware of the fact that you're more than prepared to put in the desired performances. Now, imposter syndrome in some situations is justified. There are going to be new experiences and increases in the level of competition that we're facing that make us feel a little bit out of our depth. But it is only through reaching beyond our existing comfort zone that we do progress, develop, and grow. For ideal forms of improvement to occur, we have to enter what psychologists call the zone of proximal development, which is basically the next layer outside of our comfort zone. It's that area where there will be some unfamiliarity and uncertainty. And this also happens to be the area in which athletes most commonly feel imposter syndrome. It's very rare in which they're asked to make giant leaps in performance at the click of a finger. Instead, they're placed in situations and scenarios that require them to enter that zone of proximal development. Which means that, yeah, it's going to be tough to navigate, but it's still very possible to succeed and improve in those situations. So dealing with imposter syndrome in this scenario is not about making giant leaps in performance. It's about focusing on a small number of successive steps that you can make in order to improve, develop, and take things up the next level. It's about growing more comfortable with being uncomfortable, because you're not going to end up growing or developing if you fail to leave your comfort zone. This was key for former NBA 2-time MVP Steve Nash. He was a guy who was awarded the best player in the league twice, but he suffered from immense imposter syndrome before every game. In a documentary about his career, one of Nash's teammates said, "Steve actually said to me that he feels like the most insecure basketball player until the warm-up starts. So when he's going into a game, he's not sure of what he's capable of. But then once he warms up and gets a few shots up, he's like, okay, this is how I play." For Steve Nash, he'd edge himself out of his comfort zone in the warm-up to the point in which he would then have the confidence to push into that zone of proximal development, which was being the go-to guy on the floor for his team night after night against the world's best opposition. He always found it tough, but feeling like an imposter forced him to focus on each and every next shot, those mini steps of building confidence rather than giant leaps. So if someone who was voted the best player in their sport suffered from imposter syndrome, then perhaps you should also embrace it instead of trying to stick inside your comfort zone. Now, sometimes the imposter syndrome that you are facing is so strong that, yeah, you do feel like curling up into a ball inside your comfort zone. And the reason for this is that those hurdles or challenges you're facing automatically get perceived as threats. We think there'll be moments that will lead to embarrassment, being found out, and failure. But this is a faulty way of thinking, and one that your favourite athletes have managed to successfully overcome. And the way elite performers do this is by reappraising stressors. In sports psychology, the way in which athletes appraise, or in other words think, about stressors can be broken down into two separate categories. First, and unfortunately the most common, are threat appraisals, which is when a performer sees the stressor they're facing as something harmful and that they perceive that they don't have sufficient resources to deal with it. These are the appraisals that allow imposter syndrome to run wild. Thoughts that you don't have what it takes to beat the competition, get into the team, or successfully nail that routine. But what's been found again and again in psychological research is that there is a different type of appraisal made by top performers: challenge appraisals. This is basically when they see the stressor as an opportunity to prove themselves, to grow and develop skills or abilities. Making threat appraisals is very much about loss prevention, which is a default mindset when feeling imposter syndrome. Whereas making challenge appraisals is very much about a gain mindset, that you can still get something from the experience. And one of the simplest ways to make that shift from threat to challenge appraisals is by altering the language you use and just being able to change your vocabulary ever so slightly to reappraise the stressor or situation that you're facing. A classic way is prior to performance saying to yourself that you're feeling excited rather than nervous, because the physiology of the two are incredibly similar. Both of these increase our heart rate and give us a buzz. This doesn't necessarily fool your brain, but it refocuses it to perceive upcoming situations in ways that are more productive and that can reduce those feelings of imposter syndrome. It helps you feel more in control of the challenge rather than being incapacitated by a threat. So whenever a situation arises in which that imposter syndrome starts to creep in, don't fall into the trap of appraising it as a threat and thinking of all the negative consequences that could come from that. Instead, say to yourself, right, this is a challenge, but I have the focus, the fitness, and the skills to tackle it head on. Those were 3 ways to deal with imposter syndrome as an athlete. They were general points, so if you have any specific questions about dealing with imposter syndrome in a specific sport, then drop those in the comments below. And a big thanks to everyone who's already subscribed to the channel. It really does mean a lot to me. And if you haven't subscribed, and I know there's a lot of you, sort it out, all right? This is solid content. Just drop a sub. It's not hard. Really not. Check out these other videos as well, and I'll see you in the next video. I hate that.